those live responses was really, really fascinating. So thank you all, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm just going to share a screen so that I can share some bits and bobs with you. But my aim here is to just run you through. Can everyone see that okay? My aim here is just to
Yeah,
run you
that's good.
through a bit of background to the National Emergency Briefing, where it came from, what it did, and what we're now trying to do in the sort of second phase of it. So, Peter, you must wave at me if I chunter on for too long. So for a bit of background, the NEB basically works on the basis that there's a problem around climate and nature. Climate and nature is a contested information space where what's missing is authoritative statements of fact being issued from government. And therefore, because that's not in place, we have this, the situation that we all know about where the science leans really clearly in one direction, and then that's contested in social media spaces and in the media and the press. So the question that the organisers, and I was not one of the co-founders of the NEB. It was co-founded by Nick and Simon Aldridge, who are two brothers who both come from a background in climate and nature campaigning and communications as well. Their idea was, okay, how do we solve this problem? We have to model what authoritative information would look like, and then lean on government to replicate that. So that was the kind of thinking underpinning the NEB. So that led to an event last November where Simon rented out Westminster Central Hall, which was if anyone doesn't know it, it's quite a grand building. It's really close to Parliament. So in terms of getting MPs to come along and attend, it had that appeal, and it was kind of the place where the UN first met. So it's got this grandeur, it's got this status, and they invited a wide range of people. They focused on MPs, legislators, parliamentarians from the House of Lords as well, trying to get this hall full of people who might be able to make a legislative difference. But it ended up probably being around 100 MPs, so that shows you the scale of the challenge in getting MPs along to these kind of events. But it was also populated with leaders from business, culture, faith, sport, the media. And just to give you a bit of a sense of what this looks like, here's the hall. This is Angela Francis talking about the economics of climate and nature. It was introduced by Chris Packham and then chaired by Mike Berners-Lee. And the speakers, the expert speakers, spoke on a range of topics. There were 9 different talks that ranged across nature, climate, Kevin Anderson, the weather extreme situation with Hayley Fowler, tipping points with Tim Lenton. Paul Berrin spoke about food security. Hugh Montgomery spoke about health, and Lieutenant General Richard Nugey spoke about national security, which is obviously, I mean, that's quite an interesting one because that's kind of shows you something about the approach that the NEB was taking, very much focused on the impacts on the UK and approaching things from a security point of view as much as anything else. Angela Francis, as I say, spoke about economics, and Tessa Khan spoke about the energy transition. And we filled up this hall by essentially getting inviters, we called them, people who we decentralized the inviting process because it's a small team. It's always been a small team, the NEB. It was a slightly smaller team prior to the event itself. And so we needed people to go out there and do the inviting for us. So people were tasked with the job of, if you can think of someone who should be at this event, just go out and get them along to it. And we ended up with, as I say, about 100 MPs. And the overall response was, okay, these are hard facts, but a lot of the stuff that we took from people's responses in the room was that actually they came away with quite a sense of optimism, a relief. And perhaps this quote has something to do with that. It's just the sense that actually until you face something, it's really difficult to start to address it in a meaningful way. And if you talk to anyone who works in the psychology space, there's often this idea that you really do have to start to face the reality of the situation in order to start to solve it and start to have a franker relationship with it all. And the narrative of all of these talks and expert briefings that took place in the event was always geared towards finding the solutions. So I think one concern that comes up a lot about the NEB is that somehow it's going to be bleak or distressing or kind of hard to handle. And what the feedback we were getting was that actually people in the room said that that wasn't the case at all, that there was this sense of relief, that there's a sense of actual engagement with the reality of the situation. And speaking from a personal point of view, and I'd be interested to know later whether people agree with this, but for me, if you have something which is unaddressed but lurking, that is psychologically less healthy than getting it out in the open, expressing it, and getting everyone on the same page about the reality of the situation. So that was one of the bits of feedback that I think is probably key in this conversation, that people in the room told us about their responses to the briefing itself. So just to talk a bit about the NEB brand and kind of how the whole thing has been pitched. The whole intention of the thing has been to be very like non-political, non-partisan. Nothing is affiliated with any political party. We have tried to keep it as a pure public information initiative. So not trying to propose solutions or particular political policy outcomes, because we have managed to assemble a kind of wide flotilla of key supporters. And the ones on this slide are just some of them. We sort of deliberately put the ones up on the website that would be particularly appealing to the broad swathe of Middle England. So, reliable, dependable institutions that have a significant place in our kind of cultural landscape. And we were able to attract that support specifically by being non-policy based, non-party political in our approach. And the reality is that actually NEB it's got quite a wide range of people who are willing to support it. And I think that's personally really interesting about it, because on the one hand, you've got the sort of XRE local organizer people who have typically been at the more radical flank of climate activism. They're very on board. And then right across to churches, sustainability officers in big corporates, lots of people in healthcare are engaging. We've even got we're talking to British Airways, their sustainability officer, about screening our upcoming film across their network. So it's quite interesting that it's managed to attract that wide range of engagement, and we think that's really, really key, because change happens when you get a broad swathe of people engaged around one particular topic at one particular time, and it's clear that we need a much more vigorous approach to government legislation on climate and nature, and so we are optimistic about the breadth of this thing. So just to talk you through a little bit about the sort of strategy. So the unequivocal aim of the NEB is to create a social tipping point towards genuine emergency action on the climate and nature crisis. And our kind of route to that is, it started with the event itself in Westminster, but that was very much phase one, high level, top level science, briefing by experts to senior people. Yeah, that was kind of one part of it. It was interesting reading all the Mentimeter feedback at the beginning about some people were saying that the impact seems to have been within the ENGO space primarily, and we totally accept that. That has been the primary impact, and it's one of the challenges of operating in the media landscape that we do. Although it had favourable press coverage across a range of outlets, it didn't, I think, get anything like the coverage that it should have got, or that the scale of the crisis warrants. So understanding that phase one is really just the platform that everything else is then built off. So that's the briefing. And then the idea here is that constituents start engaging with their MPs around the briefing. We have something that we're calling a parliamentary call for government to stage a televised emergency briefing. And that is basically a request that government puts this briefing or a briefing very similar to this with independent experts onto the airwaves in much the same way that it did with information during COVID, so that the public can be generally briefed on the reality of the crisis, in order that we can bring everyone into the frame about what it is that needs to be done. But phase two of the NEB process is all about this film that's currently in production. And the idea here is that this film gets rolled out across communities across the UK, so that it's being screened in every constituency, and MPs and local councillors and other elected officials are all invited to come along and watch the film with their constituents, with communities, and then start to formulate collective individual responses and collective responses to it. So the kind of macro idea here is that once you have got this information out there and you've generated a situation where the public is being really clear with its elected representatives that it wants to see action on this, the MPs become braver about putting their heads above the parapet. And you lead to a situation where the government does a televised emergency briefing and the genie's kind of out of the bottle at that point. It's very difficult, we think, for government to get up and be really public about all of this stuff. Unlike, for example, with the biodiversity report that came out recently, where it was just published on the government website very quietly, and its contents were, hair-raising, but there was no briefing, there was no briefing to press about it at all from government. And that doesn't seem to me to be a way to promulgate this kind of really, really critical infrastructural information. So we think if government is compelled to do a televised emergency briefing, it is very difficult for them to roll back to business as usual at that point. So that's the kind of the macro mission of the NEB. So just to talk a little bit about this phase 2 part about the film. The film is in production at the moment. It's being produced to like proper, televised broadcast quality. It's costing an eye-watering amount of money, which we are very, very grateful to the brilliant supporters who have come out and supported our crowdfunder, which has been up and running since I think just before Christmas, which crowdfunder told us was unequivocally the worst time to launch a crowdfunder. So we're especially grateful for everyone who's come out and supported it. That's now hit £150,000. The cost of the film is turning out to be even more than that. It's looking at more like £200,000. So we've had to introduce stretch targets to that. But we've been really heartened by the support there. And just to run you through a sense of what the film is, the film will include footage from the podium, as in from the Westminster event itself. But also we had a studio set up backstage where the experts who gave the briefing were interviewed about kind of like why they do what they do and their own personal responses to the crisis. And so this is the beginning of a sort of journey of turning the high-level science into something more human. And this is really critical for the phase 2 component. Then in the film as well, we take all that footage of the experts, both on the podium and backstage, and we're showing it to people sitting on a sofa with Chris Packham. And this will be a mixture of celebrities and non-celebrities, regular working people, and we're capturing their responses in a kind of slightly Gogglebox format, if you're familiar with that program. And again, this is about starting to understand what the individual responses are to this kind of information. So we're really starting to dive into that. We know that just top-down information is not the key, and this has been a critique that's been quite fairly leveled at the NEB so far, but we do really understand that, and we know that we need to be translating it into this kind of more human and accessible approach. So the film will be 45 to 50 minutes or so, depending on what the final edit ends up being. And then we're basically rolling it out into all of these community screenings, which are organised by local supporters. And in those screening sessions, the film will just be the first part of a screening event. The second part of a screening event will be an opportunity for community discussion. And we are working with the Climate Psychology Alliance and psychology experts at Bath University and other places who are feeding into our suggested model for how these discussion sessions are facilitated. And I should say that what we're suggesting is just a suggestion. It's a kind of invitation, and we're going to model out a few approaches that might be possible for people to take. But people will know their own communities best, and we're suggesting that people organise, according to the needs of their communities. So that will be in our facilitation guide, the guidance on how they run that. But the thinking here is very much that creates a real listening moment where people can articulate their individual responses and be heard. I think that's a really critical part of this. It's historically that the sort of climate activism space, because of the scale of the problem, has done a bit of what one climate psychologist has called yelling, telling and selling, which is not always that easy to absorb on the other end. So we're trying to really guide a route to people being given opportunity to articulate their own responses to this information and to be heard and to share that information peer-to-peer within their communities. And all of that, and the idea of all of that sort of listening moment is that it maps or begins to provide a bit of a route to action. So in terms of our call to action, the call to action of the NEB is very specifically focused on this question of information. As I say, we're a public information initiative, And the information that was shared with the audience at Westminster and then will be shared through the film with people who have come to see it in their local communities. Our ask is that this information be shared nationally. And the way we see that being done is if government says, okay, we will stage a televised emergency briefing that's broadcast in prime time across major TV networks. But so the parliamentary call that we've got on our website is all about engaging with MPs to ask them to sign that parliamentary call, asking government for that briefing to happen. And the idea is that that briefing is then it's carried out by independent experts. It's not government people who are issuing that. We would like to see the Prime Minister up on the podium introducing it, but we want the experts who are talking about it to be specialists in their field. So there's a completely independent briefing, just the facts, just the evidence and the information. And we're asking people who attend these screenings to engage with that idea of asking their MP to back the parliamentary call. And we're asking organisers to invite their MPs and other elected representatives along to these events, essentially so that the MP can sit there in the audience with their constituents, engaging with this material. It's very deliberately designed to be like non-hostile, non-combative. We understand that MPs are people too, and that this is a challenge that's going to take everyone engaging with it collectively in order to arrive at a solution. And also in those screening events, in that second part of it, there'll be space for local organisers to focus on local responses. So we understand that people who are organising this in their communities will have their own agendas about what they think is the best local solution to taking action on this topic. So there'll be space there for them to engage as well with people who come along to the screening. Just to talk for a second about how we're getting this film out there, we are partnering with climate and nature NGOs who are sharing it outwards with their member bases. So the members who then receive that information from the central hub of the NGO are fed back to our website and can register an interest to host a screening on our website, and we'll then provide them with the information that they need to get going on that. But it's really important to say that we're not just working in the climate and nature space. We're really working hard to engage with non-climate civil society, because as I said before, I think you really get impact when you land much more widely and outside the kind of ENGO bubble space, and start engaging with, for example, faith groups, sports groups, unions, Rotary clubs, WIs, scout groups, local councils, and the rest of it. So we're working really hard to engage with all of those. We're seeing a lot of positive engagement from those different communities. And also there are sector initiatives going on. So for example, we've got a group called NEB Educators who are taking the materials from the briefing, which are also available on our YouTube. The film is obviously, it's not out yet, but the briefing material is available on YouTube. And they are working with that to train up teachers in terms of how they manage climate comms within the classroom, addressing it with students' concerns and so on. And we have also got a thing called NEB Connectors, which we've introduced, which is the idea that as a small team here, centrally, we are not able to access all of the networks that we would like to access nationally, but that there are people out there who do have access to networks. So they can become NEB connectors, and they can go into their networks and say, hey, this thing is happening. We'd like to connect you with the NEB. Here's their materials, and this is how you sign up to host a screening. So that's the kind of like decentralized approach to the outreach that we've actually seen really, really positive results from. And we've got to a point now where there are, this is just rather to the south of the UK. I don't know what's happened to Scotland in that screen grab, but things going on in Scotland as well. But that is, those dots show where we've got screening interest so far. So we're at a point where we've got 1,000+ screenings in the pipeline, plus also, one union wanting to screen in 700 branches, and healthcare, as I say, and faith groups who largely are not showing up on this map yet. So we're really kind of optimistic that there's a route here to creating a real moment of national conversation that will run from the launch date of the film, which is the 7th of April, and then through the summer and into the autumn as screenings take place. And our hope is very much that there's a kind of chain reaction component to this, where people who have attended a screening in one place, perhaps in the neighbouring village or town, might then think to themselves, oh, do you know what, I could host one at home, or I've got access to a network professionally, for example, and could do a sort of sector screening or a screening within my professional circles. and then take it on themselves. We're working to make the screening process as simple and accessible as possible, and we're providing all of the supporting materials that people need to do that. So that's the macro picture. That's the strategy. What we're really heartened by is that not only is there this national uptake, but we're seeing organisers in other countries also looking to replicate the NEB model in their countries. So we've got organisers in 10 other countries who we're talking to about getting up and running with how they run the NEB there. I'll pause there so that I don't go on for too long, and we can do questions and whatnot. But that's the overview. So thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ben. I'm just going to stop the recording.